Hello everybody, this is the sixth time I've tried to record this, so we'll try again. This is my presentation on some of the potential ethical issues a translator should be aware of and how useful ethical codes are in dealing with these issues. Codes of ethics serve as a reminder that the act of translation has a moral component and is not merely a linguistic exercise. Douglas Robinson states that the professional ethics of translation have traditionally been defined very narrowly, namely that it is unethical for the translator to distort the meaning of the source text. So Robinson places the meaning almost exclusively on the conservation of the meaning. However, a problem lies in the fact that different associations and agencies have different codes of conduct and are open to interpretation for the myriad potential ethical decisions that may arise for a translator. The codes are arguably not sufficiently robust to provide adequate support to translators in day-to-day practice. Furthermore, we must question the motivation behind the creation of such codes of conduct. Mark Schwartz reasons that codes aid in the promotion of a public image and can thus be considered as a marketing tool. He continues that an assumption appears pervasive amongst academics and the business community that codes of ethics are necessarily ethical in terms of their content and use. But how can this be enforced, controlled, and measured in an already notoriously unregulated industry? But which code is the right code? Although there are many common points between the different codes of ethics of the varying associations and agencies, including issues such as competence, impartiality, completeness and accuracy, conflicts of interest, confidentiality, the continuation of professional development, and only translating into one's own native language, there are also contradictions and shortcomings within the different codes. According to the International Federation of Translators Charter, every translation shall be faithful and render exactly the idea and form of the original, this fidelity constituting both a moral and legal obligation for the translator. Whereas the Société Française des Traducteurs expresses fidelity, translators shall endeavour to produce the message to be conveyed as faithfully as possible. Should we take this difference in the way they've expressed the phrase to mean that the IFT places higher importance on accuracy than the SFT, or is it simply the way that we've interpreted what they've written? Or I've interpreted. Both of these codes represent the translator as a machine, a simple conveyor of a message, thus presenting a false image of the translation process to the client. In reality, the process is much more subjective and an inherently imperfect activity. This leads us to question whether associations and agencies use these codes as a marketing tool with which to assure the client of an impossible to uphold standard, earning more business in the process. According to Mona Baker, our wording will always, inevitably, be different to the wording of the source text, since it will be realised in a different language. This goes to underline the fact that the translator has a necessarily interpretive role in the process. This counterpoints the image put forward in translatorial codes of ethics, and the reluctance to fully embrace this mediatory role, despite its repeated re-emergence, is central to understanding the persistence of the skewed version of translation offered by codes of ethics. The ITI justify the existence of their code in stating that through this code, the Institute can ensure that the highest standards are consistently maintained amongst its members. But we must question how adherence to the code can be ensured and controlled, and what are the consequences when an individual fails to adhere. Judging from their website, the harshest consequence for failure to comply with an association's code of ethics is dismissal from the association, which is decided upon by a committee. The codes stipulate explicitly that members are required to comply separately with all relevant legal applications, thus underlining that the code is a moral guideline as opposed to a legal obligation. Translators take on an active interpretive role when tackling a text, and simply sticking closely to a source text in terms of lexis, structure, sound, metaphor, etc. is not preferable or even possible in many instances. Not only is this image of translation damaging to translators and devaluing such a complex activity, it also presents a false image to clients who expect the unobtainable and should instead be made aware of what is happening to their texts. As we see in this quote from Lane Mercer, What is at stake when we render a stretch of text or an utterance from one language into another is not so much the linguistic difference as the social and cultural representations of the other that linguistic difference invariably supposes. We see here that it's the way that we choose to represent these cultures that is important, and it's the active decisions on the part of the translator that makes the difference in the translation. In their research, Adam and Rachman-Moore, or Rachman-Moore, recorded that most employees find that pre-existing social norms have a much greater influence on their ethical conduct than the code of ethics. This suggests that there is an argument for placing more importance on the translator's ability to make a judgment based on the circumstances, pertinent factors, and conditions that are relevant to each specific situation. Arguably, teaching students how to interpret situations, think critically, and make intelligent decisions accordingly would be more effective. Yet in an industry which does not always require a qualification, how can we hope to control this? Well, we can't control this. To come back to Douglas Robinson's statement about the narrow definition of ethics in translation, that it is unethical for the translator to distort the meaning of the source text, in order to escape this definition, we must assume that critical judgment skills on the part of the translator are key. The model of absolute fidelity in translation upheld by these codes, the notion of complete and entirely impartial meaning transfer, is unrealistic and potentially harmful. It doesn't acknowledge the translator's necessary mediatory role. However, as stated by Schwartz, as long as the codes are at least somewhat effective in reducing harmful behaviour or promoting good behaviour, then the codes of ethics necessarily possess ethical legitimacy. Translation is an interpretive activity, it's not mechanical, and slight deviation in the text is sometimes necessary. Given the infinite possibility of ethical dilemmas that may arise in translation, it seems evident that in teaching translators how to judge for themselves whilst being aware of the commonly upheld ethical standards is preferable. Codes of ethics seem to be more beneficial to the image of associations or agencies than they are actively useful in guiding the translator. Thus, I think it's important that these codes not be followed blindly, but be used as a point of reference in an extremely complex and diverse subject. So, sixth time lucky. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I look forward to seeing everybody else's.